was awarded the St. Luke's Chamber Ensemble Commission, where she presented a new composition entitled NY Sonic Scores 2015. Other awards include a New Works Commission from the Journal Foundation. She has worked with many iconic artists such as Christian Marclay, Merce Cunningham, Pauline Oliveros, and Thurston Moore. And David Duff, who was in the audience. Maria's sound installations, visual objects, and live turntable performances are inspired by the values and lessons learned from improvisational methods and chance encounters. Tonight she will be talking about failure and rejection as it relates to her development as an artist. And without further ado, we welcome Maria Chavez.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice to have family and friends be here, and it actually makes me more nervous because then you can't mess up because your mom's going to yell at you later now. So I wanted to just start off by saying that this is one of my most popular lectures that I give when I teach at different universities and arts institutions. And it was really surprising that a lecture like this would be so popular, because normally it's my abstract turntablism workshops or lectures about my own personal practice. And the funny story about this lecture is that this lecture was actually a rejected proposal within itself. So to have a popularized lecture that was also rejected by an organization is, to me, just a really funny inside joke with myself. Because originally, the organization CUNY University in New York City, they were having a feminist women in sound workshop symposium, and they asked me to present a lecture about being a woman in sound, being a woman artist. And I was just like, well, I mean, I don't really want to talk about myself, so maybe I'll invite a group of women to come, and we'll all have a discussion about what it's like to be a woman in art, because they're all in different worlds. And then from there, I'll read the transcript, and then that will be my lecture. But then, as I was trying to organize 4 of us to sit down together, because we're all very busy with traveling, we couldn't come to an agreement of a good time to meet. And I thought that was an excellent way of presenting what it's like to be a woman in the arts, by reading this email exchange of back and forth, trying to schedule a time to sit down to talk about being a woman in the arts. And so when I presented the original proposal to CUNY to say, actually, I want to give a lecture where I'm reading the transcript of the emails of a failed attempt of trying to meet together, they said, no, we don't want you to do that. We just want you to talk about your turntable stuff. And I don't like it when institutions try to box me in that way, because yes, I do love being a turntablist, and obviously it's the origins of my practice as a sound artist. But for someone to say that they don't want me to be creative with a presentation made me have to think even deeper. And so instead I was like, all right, sure, I'll talk about my work. And so then I decided to do all of my failed proposals as a kind of an inside stick it to them of still doing what they want, but still doing it my way. So revisiting those words is exactly what it is. I'm revisiting the proposals of these ideas that I had that were then rejected by arts organizations around the world. And failed attempt as material is really just more of an inside poke to them, because they wouldn't let me do what I wanted. So before I get into the proposals, just to give some people some background, I'm known as an abstract turntablist. I also make multi-channel sound installations and using light, and sometimes there's a narrative. It just depends on if it's a site-specific piece or if it's a preconceived idea. But originally, when I first started here in Houston, and I was actually a museum guide here, so exciting. When I first started working with Dave at Mecca and his improvisation classes, it was all based on working with a turntable as a sound source to use in improvised methods. And I really love the fact that even the turntable in itself was a chance procedure, because when Dave originally invited me to become part of MECA, to become part of the Pauline Oliveros Foundation, I needed to take these after-school classes, but I was a DJ, I didn't play an instrument. And Dave said, well, bring a turntable and let's see what happens. And so he actually chose my instrumentation that I then took on and made into what it is. So of course, I always give Dave all the credit because he deserves it and he's the best. So sorry, Dave, I just had to say that. So just quickly, turntable basics for people that, you'll be surprised when I teach this, people have never seen a turntable before, so that really blows my mind, but maybe it also shows my age a little bit. But so just so you guys understand, this is just a basic 1200 techniques turntable. Every turntable has all of these basic functions. You start over here, this is the turntable, this is the tone arm weight, which pretty much determines the weight that the needle is placed onto the record groove itself. From there, you go into the tone arm. There's an anti-skating dial that determines which angle the needle will face when it's going in this direction towards the end of the record, or towards the spindle of the turntable, as I call it. From there, you have the lever, which decides when to lift it up and place it down. It's a really nice weighted lever that is, has a kind of a halting placement, because with audiophiles, you can't scratch the record, you can't mess up your records this way, so you needed that kind of lightweight lever to help place the needle down nicely in order not to ruin your audio playback vinyl. From there, you have the tone arm. Every tone arm is different on different models of different companies. My personal favorite is this kind of curved one. I'm actually writing another version of my Turntablism book right now, where I'm kind of giving the straight tone arm a hard time, but I'm trying not to be too objective about it, but this is my favorite curve of tone arm. Then from there you have the needle or the stylus, and this pretty much is what you place on the turntable plate in order to play back the vinyl that's turning on and the plate itself is on a rotating motor so that it goes in a circle. And then this is the needle. The needle that you see in this image here is more of a blocky, and I can kind of show you. I have a beast one right now. But I'm not actually a big fan of this blocky style. It's a little too chunky, and it doesn't have enough like elegance when you play around with it. So when I wrote my first book of technique, Chance Procedures on Turntable, I was talking about stylus that you use that are more aerodynamic from orthophone, that have a more skinnier shape to it. And so that's why this stylus looks different than what the image looks like. And so when you look at a needle, if you touch the bottom of it here and just lightly press your finger to it, you'll feel a little prick, a little point. And that is the point that you place on the vinyl in order to read the sounds that have been recorded into the groove. So what it is the needle is a transducer. It's changing the vibrations that it's reading and turning it into sound. And then there's a cantilever, a tiny part of the needle that carries a permanent magnet that essentially reads the vibration of the record, turning the electrical signal into what is heard as sound by us. That's the definition. And I really love this image here. It's not totally accurate though, but I think it's a really great way of thinking about what is really happening when you're looking at a needle and a record in a microscopic way. What's really happening is that point from the other image is going down into this groove, and if you look at a record, you'll see all these tiny grooves all aligned against each other. And so this is saying this is a right wave channel and a left wave channel. That's not totally accurate. I've had some discussions with some people about how exactly the energy changes, but I'm still researching it a little bit, so I don't want to give too much more. But essentially what you're doing is the needle is dealing with friction. This is pretty much what this audio playback is all about, is the friction of going through a groove, reading the vibration, and then coming back as sound, which I think is super romantic friction. And so, of course, I started with Dave. Dave pretty much gave me a crash course in sound, improvisation, and mainly through the works of Pauline Oliveros, who is now a really great mentor and friend, and I'm so honored that she continues to participate in my practice. She's always very open whenever I'm confused or have a question. And I think part of the reason why I like improvisation, Dave's practices with them, and with Pauline, is that it really is open to the opportunity of accidents and chance, rather than thinking about a wrong note or something goes awry. I feel like that kind of terminology is flawed in a lot of ways, because it doesn't give any opportunity to the other side of what can go wrong. So these are just basic definitions of chance, just to give you guys an idea. And when I wrote my first book, I used the term chance procedures because I thought that everyone used these terms, but it's actually only known as a John Cage term. There isn't actually a vocabulary term on chance procedures itself, which I think is pretty interesting. I don't know why, or at least I haven't been able to find it. And with John Cage and his chance procedures, he developed it with a certain composition piece he created with the I Ching, where he would sit there and he had the I Ching coins, this Chinese coins that were a way of telling the future. So you would ask it a question, you would drop the coins, and how they fell was the answer. And John Cage was using it as a way of determining the next phase of a sound piece. So he would pull the coins, drop them, they would fall, and then from that he would make his next choice. So yeah, luck or fortune, possibility or probability of anything happening, a 50% chance of success. And then as my work started to develop even more, I started to become really fascinated by the present moment and the paradox of the present moment in relationship to chance. And I think even if you're taking an improvisation class like one of Dave's Mecca classes, I feel like it's really, even if you're not a musician or if you're not an artist, it's still a really great class to take, because it makes you more in tune with your own instincts and with your own choices. So even if it's not something that you are going to create or make into an art piece or something, it's still a really great way of developing a language with yourself. And from that, it's a really great way of being present in a room with other people and having that space, because we're always stuck in our heads, and we're not really thinking outside of our minds. And it's really great practice to be able to stop and realize that there is this paradox. You never know what will happen in front of you. You remember what happened behind you, but it's always right now. And that was something that really helped whenever I would take these improvisation classes. It really helped me to define and understand my understanding of it. So I like to discuss the paradox of time in the present moment with a lot of students in the classes that I teach. And so you have chance, you have improvisation, you have this theory of paradox of time in the present moment, and then you have the beauty of destruction, which is my favorite part of my practice. Is I can't help it. It's just part of who I am. I break things. I don't know why. Mom never lets me have things because I'll break it, And instead of looking at that as a negative trait, I decided to see how I could incorporate that into my practice, and not necessarily break things on purpose, but accept when things break, and not make me feel like I'm wrong for allowing it to break, but looking at the break in a more positive light, and then seeing how I can reincorporate that into the practice that I've already developed. And this is a really great quote that I love. It's by Sean McNiff: "Trust the process, an artist's guide to letting go. The mistake is outside the intended course of action, and it may present something that we never saw before, something unexpected and contradictory, something that may be put into use." I highly recommend that book if you're interested in making chance-based work. And so then from there, I combine all of these theories, and I improvise, normally with one turntable, one mixer, and a collection of broken to perfect needles and broken to perfect records, and create improvised sound pieces. I call them sound sculptures, that normally vary from like 2 to 5 minutes long. It just depends on the performance. When I was just in Marfa this last weekend, the piece was actually 30 minutes long, which is actually the longest I ever play. I can never play past 45 because my brain starts to wear out. So one thing I get questioned on everywhere I go, and I get emailed about all the time, is how is it that you create all of your sound pieces with only one turntable and a mixer? How is it possible to keep a constant flow with not really having anything to mix back to? And I think my practice is really lucky because when I first started improvising, a majority of the people that I was learning improvisation with were either working with electroacoustic instruments or acoustic instruments. And they only have one. They can't play 2 trombones or 2 guitars. I mean, they could, but it would be really complicated. So I actually never really thought about one turntable or performing with one turntable as an issue. And I think it's really interesting socially that people can't really see how you can play with just one turntable, because that means that they're so attached to the DJ idea of what a turntable is, its representation. And so that's something that I try to bring up when people ask me, because normally when they talk to me about turntablism, it's normally based on music, hip-hop turntablism, or DJing, which is 2 turntables and 1 mixer, and then you mix into each other. But I feel like everyone plays one instrument. Why can't I just play one turntable? And when I first started, though, I did follow that idea that it was a DJ. I was a DJ, so I'm going to have 2 turntables, and that's how I'm going to improvise and play these shows. And it was so much work just to get all the equipment to the show and set it up. It was too much. And then I decided one day, I'll just read this back because it's pretty much the same thing, that as I was using 2 turntables for my performances, and the pieces were way too long. They're about 45 minutes long. And what I was noticing was I was distracting myself from what the moment wanted to say because I was too busy dealing with mechanics. I was too busy trying to make sure that this was running in sync with that, or it was just a lot, and there was no actual thought of placement, of choice or not choice, of just action, because you were too busy being active in a different way. So there was too much to manage and control. Then I decided to only work with one turntable and put myself in a really uncomfortable position and see how much space I can fill with sound. Then when I actually performed with one turntable, I realized that filling space with sound had nothing to do with improvisation, because silence is just as important as sound choices. By the way, you guys in the back, there's some seats over here if you want to come over. Please don't stand the whole time. Hey, Matthew. Please come by. You're welcome to. I'm not going to be. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. So, like I was saying, once I put myself in this really uncomfortable position, I realized, oh, what I was doing was not actually a piece. I was just actually too busy just making stuff and looking like I was doing something. And that was a real challenge for me to confront myself with. And I think for being like 22, 23 at the time and confronting myself that way was actually a lot more thoughtful than I thought at the time. And so then the next phase of being an improviser, of making sound work, of making work with friends and playing shows was everyone records, right? You play, you record, you put something out, and it's for sale, and then you're playing, and you can tour, and you have stuff to sell. And I just had a real big problem with recording practice because I felt like I was being hunted. I felt like when I was in a studio, especially when I made my first album, Those Eyes of Hers, in 2004, they put me in a studio with all of these microphones pointing at me, and then they went to the back and they're like, okay, go. And they're like looking at me from the glass, and I'm just sitting there like, what, I'm supposed to make a special moment now? Like, you're just telling me what to do. And I just felt that it wasn't right, but it was really contradicting with what my peers and my mentors were doing, and I was really, really confused by it. And so I decided to make an extreme decision after this first album came out, and I said to myself, I'm just not going to release any more work, because this work isn't music to me. This work is a practice, it's an action, it's an improvised sculpture that belongs to the audience, not to anyone else. And if other people are to hear these pieces outside of the performance context, it loses its meaning. And so there is something poetic and beautiful about that, but at the same time, it wasn't the message that I wanted to come across when I was performing for people in a setting like this. And so I just told them, you know, just because I work with sound doesn't make it music. I'm going to take this stance and no longer record my work, and I haven't made an album since 2004. So if you think about it, my career is completely based on a myth. It's completely based on people telling other people about the show and this, and then there's videos, but those are free, so you can have those, that's fine. And if I do have recordings available, they are for mainly benefit, like for the tsunami earthquake in Japan in 2011. If people ask me to donate something for an album, I will give them that, because then I'm not profiting off of it, and it is more of a composed piece for an event rather than just recording an improvisation of mine. So then with that, that's when I talk about my book. After a certain time period, I was starting to get really frustrated with just being cornered as a turntablist. I was like, but I feel like I'm more than just I'm an artist like that. I've always been developing like since I was a child. I was lucky enough to find peers that helped me develop even more, and I don't feel like I'm in this zone, and I didn't feel very comfortable. So I decided instead of making an album, I would write a book, a how-to manual of turntablism. And so yeah, it's called Of Technique, Chance Procedures on Turntable, and this is my first rejection. This book was a heartbreaking rejection. I proposed to Printed Matter, this organization in New York City, who give funds to emerging artists to make a short run of books. And they rejected it pretty quickly, and it broke my heart. But at the same time, I knew it needed to be made, so I decided to just put the work in myself, and with the help of my friends and my family and some private fundraising, I was able to make a batch of 100 that then turned into another 100 and ended up becoming what it is today. So the original proposal of Technique, Chance Procedures on Turntable is a book written and illustrated as a how-to manual documenting the past 10 years of my abstract turntable practice that's entirely been developed through chance procedures. The essays are accompanied with illustrations showing the various hand positions of different sound vocabulary techniques and can act as a guide and graphic score for the reader to create their own turntable compositions. So there would be an essay of the technique, and then there would be an illustration of mine with it, and you were encouraged to tear the illustrations out in order to make your own turntable compositions. By removing the illustrations, the book changes from a how-to manual into an interactive sculpture. So I love books. I love that they still exist. It's like such an old technology, but it's still stuck around, and we still use them, and everyone collects them just like records, but they're even older. And when you use them and you have your favorite book, it looks so beautiful because the pages start to fan out and everything starts to curl and it looks old and there's dog ears, and it's just a really beautiful object. So I decided that the book was an object to me. To me, if people were starting to open it and read it and participate in the book, then it was technically an interactive sculpture. I wrote this book to serve as a marker of the first 10 years of my work. I'm ready to move forward and expand my practice, but felt I needed to document everything I developed before moving on. I do not believe in recording my live improvised sound pieces to sell, which is why there's no full recordings of my work available for purchase. This is the first sound-related release of my work since 2004. Even though the book is practical in its contents, the book as a whole is an interactive art piece. And I also thought it was kind of an inside joke, because it's like you're at a show, it's a noise show, it's really crazy and everyone's going nuts, and then you have the merch table and there's all these records and CDs, and then there's my book. And I love it, that statement within itself was strong enough for me to pursue it even though it got rejected. So as my practice started to develop as a turntablist, and it's so cool to be back here because now I'm really remembering all of these experiences that I had. I was starting to look into the work of Christian Marclay and Otomo Yoshihide and all of these, and Marina Rosenfeld, all of these iconic turntablists, and in particular Christian. He's so clean and really meticulous. And if you're not familiar with Christian Marclay's work, he is an internationally acclaimed artist. He won the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale in 2013, I think, for The Clock, which is this 24-hour video installation where he took footage from MGM films and just cut out all of the pieces, all of the parts that had either a clock or an image of a clock, or someone's asking what time is it, and they look at their clock, and he placed it all minute by minute for 24 hours in an order. So when you watched it, every minute would show a clock, and if you looked at the clock's time and you looked at your time, it was the same time. It's a really brilliant piece, but he's also known for his early work in the 80s in the downtown New York scene for his turntablism work, and his work is actually quite advanced for that time period. He made a turntable guitar where it was a turntable and like a fretboard, and he would play the turntable like a guitar, which I thought totally blew my mind. And he also did, outside of turntablism, a really beautiful performance sound piece called Guitar Drag, which I think is one of my favorite pieces of his, where he placed an amplifier in the back of a truck and connected an electric guitar to it and placed the electric guitar on the gravel of a dirt road, and then he got into the driver's seat and drove off and recorded the results of the guitar dragging on the dirt road, which I think is a beautiful piece. And it's on vinyl, so I'm hoping to get it one day so that I can ruin it too. So as my practice was developing and seeing Christian Marclay's turntablism works, I was like, God, he's so clean. How does he get the line so straight when he breaks the vinyl? It doesn't, like, you need like a hacksaw or something, and I don't have access to things like that. And what I really like about vinyl, another joke, inside joke for me, is when I tell people I'm going to teach you how to break vinyl, I'm not really teaching you anything. The vinyl's going to break however it wants to break. There's really nothing I can do to show you how to break it. I can show you a good way to break it, which would be, let me make sure I'm picking out a good one. I've had this one for a long time. So you get the record, you place it on your hip, and you break it. So the simplest way to break. So if you're going to start breaking records, then I highly recommend the hip break, which is my favorite way to do it. In my workshops, I'm like, pick up your shards, you need your shards, because it's really important with the shards, and I can show you in this video too. When you are starting to improvise with the turntable and you break a record and it breaks in shards, it's a really fun way to just learn how to allow things to just fall apart. And so normally what I do is I have everyone break a few records, and I have a warning. Your needles, it's B-Y-O-N and V. Bring your own needles and records or vinyl, and then of course everything will be ruined. So please, just know that before you come in. And so then you just place your broken shards on. There it already goes, and then it just goes crazy, and then it makes different. Gorge. They always make different kinds of compositions in their own breaks, because you're just picking up shards, putting it on, you're allowing it to completely go everywhere and become something else. And that always blows everyone's mind. It takes like 20 minutes for people to move from that. That's the first technique you learn in my workshops, and it takes forever to get people to the next technique. But I think it's because it's okay. I'm allowing people to break things, and I'm allowing people to let things fall apart and go where they want. And when they have that access and that kind of acceptance where it's okay, I think that's when they can't really let go, because that experience is so special. And so as I started to break these records, I was like, well, there needs to be some kind of composition to it. It can't just be like, I mean, yeah, broken shards, you throw it on a record player, and yeah, it sounds great, but I wish there was something a little bit more. And so Castor and Pollux was a series that I developed, also rejected regularly in my early work, where I got two of the same record, and I broke one and placed it on top of the other. And it follows the story of Castor and Pollux, which is the mythology story of Castor and Pollux, the brothers that shared the same father, Zeus, but one brother had a mortal mother and the other brother had a goddess for a mom. So they would fight a lot in all of these wars and were just the best of friends. They were twins, they did everything together. And then one day, I believe it was Pollux, he got injured and was dying. And Castor was like, went to Zeus and begged Zeus, please save my brother. I can't live without him. Please give him life again so he can survive. And Zeus said, all right, I'll let him live, but you guys have to be up in the sky. And that became the constellation Gemini, and I'm a Gemini, so it's kind of this whole thing. So that's the story of Castor and Pollux. And normally what leads into this is like, well, how do you choose your records? How are you deciding, you know, what sounds you play with? And I have a process now that's been developing over time. I used to pick my own records, and I still do, but the rule is now, if I go to a record store and I find a record that's interesting, I'm not allowed to listen to it after I buy it until I'm in front of an audience, and then that way we can listen to it together. Because I also have this weird, I just don't really like being in this performance hierarchy of, I'm the performer and you're the audience, so you should listen to me. Like, I just don't really, I feel like there's, with my own practice, there's something more involved. Like, we're all working together. We're creating work together. So your energy is advising my choices in a lot of subconscious ways. So I decided to make this rule as a way of challenging myself and also challenging the audience. And I let them know, especially if it's in a new city. I'm like, I've never played here before. I've never heard this record. Let's all get to know it. And then from there, I go into my performance stuff. So the other way that I find I choose my records to perform is I allow the records to find me. And this experience developed a few years ago when I was in Ohio playing a show. Afterwards, these kids, people just come to my shows and they bring me records, and it's amazing. I'm always so honored. But sometimes it's too many. So these kids came with a box full of these records that were all, in the 40s and 50s, there used to be these recording in a booth where you could go into a booth, record yourself, and then just take one like cardboard record or a metal tin record type, and you could hear yourself, and you could take it home and play it on your gramophone and hear it. And these kids brought this box in, and it was all of these individual record in a booth records from all of these people that just disappeared, and I have no idea who anyone is. It's like Annie on piano, 1943. And then on top of that, you have the record itself, which I really love that the record is so fragile because it's really recording time into the surface area. It's a surface area time with scratches and scrapes, and you can never avoid it if you allow the records to be on their own without their sleeves. And I really love that language. That's the crackling that you hear, this kind of popping and stuff. And so when those records started to find me and I started to use those in my performance practice, I was just like, oh wow, this is actually a lot more interesting than me choosing my sounds to make into a piece. It would be cool if I just not necessarily depended on people, but was more open to allowing people to bring me more things. And one of my favorite stories I like to tell that still gives me chills to this day was a few days before the Japan tsunami earthquake in 2011, a friend of mine who's a record dealer, he had a record for disaster mitigation. And he's like, I don't really know what to do with this. Do you want this? And I was just like, I guess so. Yeah, I don't know. I'll figure it out. And I kind of skimmed through it, and it was just this really boring guys going, oh, what do you do with disaster mitigation? It's just, you know, but it's a tone that you need when a disaster is happening. You have to have a, you know, soft approach because everyone is frantic, and you need to calm them down and understand how to avoid disaster, how to create mitigation of disaster. And then 2 days later, the tsunami earthquake happened, and I was asked by Thrill Jockey to give them a sound piece for their double CD compilation for the disaster benefit recovery, disaster relief. And so I'll just play this track really fast.
Disaster, a word that can mean problems. While you often cannot avoid disasters, preparation in advance can help. Here to explain is Bill Wilcox, Administrator, Federal Disaster Assistance Administration. Bill, can disasters be prevented? Isn't there anything you can do to stop a hurricane or a flood or a tornado or an earthquake?
Well, there have been from time to time experiments with respect to seeding hurricanes or relieving the pressure that causes earthquakes. But as a practical matter, right now, it is not possible to stop either a hurricane or tornado or flood or an earthquake. The best thing we can do is to try to mitigate the adverse effects on human beings of any one of these disasters.
What do you mean by mitigate?
By mitigation, of
What do you mean here by mitigate?
By mitigation of any one of these
What do you mean here? What do you mean here by mitigate?
by mitigation of disaster.
What do you mean here by mitigate?
By mitigation of disasters, or sometimes it's called hazard mitigation, we mean better building construction so that the homes and other type structures can better building construction so homes and so that the homes better hazard mitigation we mean
What do you
of disasters or other type structures can withstand high winds, earthquakes, or flooding. And it also means better use of the land so that we don't locate large numbers of homes, say down in the floodplain, a 100-year floodplain where there's a 1% probability of the flood occurring in any single year, or say putting a home or a number of homes on an earthquake fault where there's a very good plane where there's a 1% plane where a plane, 100, so the better mean, say down in Maine where plane occurring or say the flood occurring in any single year, or the flood occurring in any single year, or a plane where there's in any single the flood occurring down in the floodplain, 100-year so earthquakes or flooding, and it also means better use and it all or another and so that we don't flood occur and possibilities building standards.
Ability of the federal government or the state federal government or
And we usually mean, well, in summary, when we talk about home fall earthquake. So an earthquake is, in summary, when we, mitigation is
ability of disaster mitigation, response disaster mitigation,
particularly governments have responsibilities that they have inherently use powers that they live in as well built. Flood insurance also mitigates mitigation operations of it, disaster themselves with some disaster mitigation activities. Lastly, and perhaps most important, we're doing a good deal of citizen education by publications and other kinds of material and public service announcements. Importantly, and advise government on the community before people who live or have businesses in that an earthquake.
It's kind of hard to hear, but the very ending of, well, I can go dissecting this track for a while, but one thing I wanted you guys to think about was the depth of sound that vinyl can provide for you, because you have the record, what the purpose of it was recording sound into it. So in this case, it was 2 records. This is one of my only pieces I've recorded with 2 turntables. One was disaster mitigation. The other was my broken shard, Castor and Pollak's process with music for Zen, Japanese music for Zen, and I mixed those 2 to make a sound piece for them. But you can hear, if you could really listen to the depth of it, it wasn't just the sounds in the vinyl, it's also the electroacoustic properties of the vinyl itself, and also treating those sonic properties in the vinyl as other characteristics too. So I used their words as a narrative, but I also used them as a bass line. So when you heard it was too bassy, it was on purpose. And then, of course, I would take away the bass and it would create a different kind of percussive element to it. And so one of the other things that I like to talk about with this particular piece is the fact that at the very end, as I was improvising, this was all improvised. This wasn't a piece that I pieced together, like I played and I put together and then I did it again. I improvised this live, and one thing that Dave's practice and Pauline's practice has taught me is to listen hard and listen for your space, listen for the time that it's like, when is this going to be, not necessarily when it's going to be over, but I feel that the cycle is finishing. And when I randomly placed the needle on a part of the record that said, and lastly, I said, the piece is telling me that it's almost finished. And then I improvised a bit more, and then the last part that I placed the needle on the mitigation record side was of an earthquake, and I just froze. And I just left it, and then that loop that you heard from the music for Zen side was a loop that didn't exist at all in the whole piece until the very end, and that's when I knew that things came together. So just so you understand, when I do improvise, how I place myself and how I think about things. This is just an illustration of my rhythmic shards flashcard from the book of throwing the, what you do is you throw your broken shards on your record, you place a 45 on top, which is this poorly drawn circle here, and then you place your shards within it so that they don't move. And then you push play, and then you can make your own fun loops. So try that at home, but you will break your needles, so don't blame me for it, I promise. So I wanted to expand more on Castor and Pollux and on the broken shards idea, and so I came up with this idea, this video installation idea called Urban Drift, which was a piece I made in 2013. It was inspired by the London riots that happened around then, where there was a lot of homes in different neighborhoods that people were just vandalizing, and so I decided to make a piece about it because I was watching on one of the video feeds this, from a helicopter, there was a weird glitch that was happening in the feed, and I really had an affinity to that glitch. I didn't really understand why, but I recorded the glitch of the footage, and I decided to make that into an interactive sound sculpture with vinyl. And the reason why I realized later on, once I was finally able to realize the piece, was the physical glitch matched, the glitch of the video matched the physical glitch of the vinyl. And so just quickly, Urban Drift was really more of a play on a phenomenon that happens in all of our minds called the McGurk effect, which, you know, when you're in a car and you have your windows up, and you're listening to a song, and then you see that little, by the car sales guy has the thing that goes up and goes down, and it's like all bouncing all around, and it's like, wow, it's bouncing to the music. It's actually not beat matched to the song that you're listening to. It's your mind trying to correspond what you see with what you're hearing and place it with each other. And so Urban Drift was a play on that. It was a proposal that was meant to highlight the McGurk effect and also talk about this level of glitch and interaction with physical glitch and video glitch. And it was unfortunately rejected. But then, thankfully, because I kept pushing towards it, Julia Gerlach from she's the director of music at the DAAD, this program in Germany. She was open to hearing my proposal again. It was rejected from an arts organization in New York City, and I proposed it again to her, and she accepted it for a group show in Basel at the Haus für Elektronische Künste, and I was able to show it there alongside people like Simone Gilles Aubry and Stephen Cornford. And these are just images of, so what you would do is, I would be the person, I would walk up to the platform where the turntable was, I put the needle on the record, and I watched the video as I watched the needle jump around. Because what's happening when you're putting so many broken shards on a record, it's jumping up and down. And so this is a short video about that. I saw this footage of the BBC London City riots from a few years ago and captured the footage, edited it down to show this natural glitch that was happening through the feed. And from that, I saw that it had a similarity to my layered vinyl compositions, and decided to bring the two together and make an interactive installation. And technically what I'm doing is I'm making a natural glitch. It's the most physical glitch you can find in an old technology like vinyl. And so what's happening is, as the needle is trying to read the vinyl, because there's so many little layers from these broken pieces of records, it actually starts to jump around, similar to what the people are doing in the video. So one thing that I was really happy about when the piece was finally accepted by someone, when I could actually finally show it, was during the opening, people came up to me. They're like, "What program did you use to sync the vinyl with the video?" And I was just like, "It's all right here." So someone else asked me about if there are people born without a McGurk effect in their, I don't know if that's possible. I'm still looking into that, but, and so this is just another image. Wallpaper music, this one hurt my heart so much when it got rejected. This was proposed for the Frieze Foundation and the M-Award during Frieze in London in 2013. And what it was a play on, it was an installation about playback technology, but with player piano scrolls. Are you guys familiar with player piano scrolls? For some people that aren't, it's one of the first playback technologies. It was made in the late 1800s into the 1900s, and it was the first time the public could hear recorded music, not recorded because it was this paper with cutouts. It almost looks futuristic if you look at one. But it was the first time you could hear something played back without a human actually playing it in front of you, because before that, if you wanted to listen to music, you'd have to learn how to read music and then play it on a piano or on a violin and be at a concert to hear it. And so this was actually revolutionary of its time. You just had to put a scroll in a piano, push play, and it would play your favorite song. And I wanted to take a step back because I felt like a lot of people in the sound world were starting to reject old technologies and only focus on computer technology with different, like Max MSP and things like that. And it was a little sad to see that it was all going in that direction. I was like, well, I'm not interested in that, so I'm going to go way back this way and propose this piece. So it was a transformative hallway installation in the entrance of the Frieze Art Fair entitled Wallpaper Music. Combines my interest of old technologies and using them in new and innovative ways while presenting a new view on how sound art can be displayed in a contemporary art fair. So pretty much what I was doing was I was proposing to create a hallway where I colored in the spaces that a player piano scroll has. You place the piano scroll, and then you just color it with pastels, you remove it, and it becomes a different image. And you don't know that it's a player piano scroll image until you get to the end of the hallway and you see the pile of the piano scrolls in front of you as a sculpture, and then you realize what you're walking through wasn't this digital thing. It was actually it's actually really old technology that mimics new technology. And it was rejected, and it hurt my feelings. But at the same time, another organization in Brooklyn, or I guess Ridgewood in Queens, called the Knockdown Center, which is a gigantic old glass manufacturing building. They were open to presenting the piece there, which I was thrilled about. It wasn't going to be for a few days. That was only going to be for one night. But I was like, whatever it takes. I just want to show it. I just need to get it out of my head and onto something so that I can just see it. So I decided to call it Improvised Sight. And Improvised Sight because even though I had the player piano scroll out to color it in, I was improvising with how I was coloring it in. So I was choosing different colors at different places, and then once I lifted it up, I couldn't go back and add anything else, which is similar to improvisation. You can't go back unless you're recording, but in a show, it doesn't work that way. So I thought that that was a better way of describing the original proposal of wallpaper music. So Improvised Sight is an installation that reimagines and reexamines player piano scrolls in a contemporary context. The scroll is often considered the precursor to computer language, accomplish mechanically what MIDI files do digitally and electronically. The scrolls are used to create this installation, explore the act of translation from the visual into the oral, blurring the distinction between structure and improvisation. Improvised Sight is an interactive sculptural drawing. Visitors are encouraged to add to the piece using the drawing tools provided. So the main goal was to create this kind of, instead of being a hallway, it was on the ground instead. And so for the first few feet, I filled in the spots, and then at the very end, I left some piano scrolls out. And you can see at the corner here, this is the sculpture of the used piano scrolls that I used for the original part. And then everyone was allowed at the end, as you can see here, to participate and color in their spots whenever they wanted to. And they really ended up making a beautiful piece, even better than mine, so I was really glad. And that piece you can see on my website. So I'll kind of speed up a little bit because I think we're running out of time here. Lap Sleeve Linger was another rejected proposal of a multi-channel sound installation. It's a site-specific installation placed in spaces of temporary activity. Combining the effect of movement and distance, sounds emitted in this installation will travel around the inside perimeter, reacting to the unique nuances of location or venue, providing sonic link between individuals and their surroundings. So pretty much what the original proposal was, it was for an art space in London, was instead of you deciding where to stand and the speakers only being in one place, you can move around and the speaker's sound would move around you as well. And also discussing this kind of transitory auditory action where the sounds are traveling around you in a space of travel. So normally, I think, Daniel, you were calling it a non-place, right? So it's this place that exists, but it's not a place that anyone lives in, so like a train station or something like that. And so from there, Lap Sleeve Linger has now actually been presented 3 different times since 2013, and this is the video for that. And this was the first place it was shown at this place in Brooklyn called Silent Barn, which is a performance venue and also a place where people have stores and people live. And so I made this piece in the stairwell. So as you walked up and down, the sounds in each speaker traveled up and down with you. Sources that I chose, and I choose for a majority of my Lap Sleeve Linger presentations, are from my vinyl collection. So I will create little samples that are then placed in a program that allow the sounds to travel from one speaker to another. So there's still this link to the turntablism and to this old playback technology sound. So yeah, since then, Lap Sleeve Linger has been shown in a few places. One of my favorites was at Beekman Place. It's this place right by the UN. It's a very famous apartment penthouse that was designed by Paul Rudolph. This is just the speaker placement. The red X's were the speakers. So everyone that was around, they could travel around and the speakers would be around. And then the biggest Lap Sleeve Linger that I was able to present was at the Domena Center in New York City, which is it's a building. It's the only floating room in New York City, and a floating room is a room that, because there's subways underneath, and then they have a space, a gap, and then they have the foundation, and then they have the room, so that you can't feel any of the subway sounds or outdoor sounds. And it's the space is meant to be used for orchestras to record. It's a recording studio for orchestras for when they're recording soundtracks for movies and things. But the organization invited me to come in and use their 50 speaker sound. I was like, yes, I couldn't believe it. And so I was able to actually work with a lighting guy to create an environment where all of the speakers, which were on each wall, 50 aligning each wall with 6 subwoofers, I think. So then that way they could actually make the room sound like, if the composer wanted the soundtrack to sound like it was being recorded in Carnegie Hall, they could fill the room with certain white noise so that it would sound that way. So it's thrilling to be there. And these are just my speaker configurations to my sound engineers to get that organized. The Reign of Applause is a piece that was rejected many times, but also has seen quite a lot of life within itself. The first time when it was finally accepted was at this space in Sweden called Inkonst in Malmö in Sweden. And it was part of an artist in residency program that I was in there. And I can just...
It's amazing. This is like the third time we've been down.
Oh, that's wonderful.
First time when we were down, then we went up. We were like, we feel so happy. Yeah.
So this was a 6-channel sound installation, and the spotlights in the space were pretty much just highlighting the placement of the speakers. And then you walked in, and what it was a 24-hour sound piece that I compiled along with the Inkomst Arts Organization and from a friend Bjorn, who teaches a class in Stockholm. They recorded applause for a month, gave me the sound works, and then I pieced all the applause together to make a 24-hour sound installation of only applause. And I feel like it's a really interesting way to highlight a certain characteristic of a city that we don't really think about. Between 9 and 11 at night, maybe even midnight, you hear the sound of applause, and it's normally just a reaction. And I know earlier, you were asking me, like, do people just feel really excited and like they just want to? I was like, yeah, a lot of people do feel that way, but my original intention was the rain of applause is to make the act of an applause, separating it from its sound source and then giving it a new auditory presence, like being in a thunderstorm. And actually, after 6 hours of me being in that applause, it didn't really sound very happy anymore. It really started to sound like a rainstorm. So, yeah, it's a site-specific multi-channel sound installation containing playback audio of applause recorded from live events in and around each specified area of interest. It was just shown at Brick Arts in Brooklyn in September, and I'll be showing it again in St. Petersburg in Russia in July, where I will be spending a month there, going to all of their shows, recording as much applause as possible, and then putting it together to create a unique way of showing the sound of St. Petersburg with just their applause. So I'm really excited about that. And so just to kind of wrap up everything, and also just to bring up the new work that I've been making, a lot of the work now, since I've had my career has really been developing the past few years, it's no longer been about rejected proposals as much as now it's about looking at when things seem to go awry and trying to figure out how to make it into something else. And this was a huge lesson I learned, and I was like, oh, this must be the next phase of the rejection, is being confronted with problems in spaces and dealing with sound. Being a sound artist is already complicated enough in an art gallery environment. So Matthew Lyons, who's a curator at the Kitchen, invited me to be artist in residence there last year. And when I went to visit the space to propose the original sound piece I wanted to make, and I got to the second floor gallery space, there was a rehearsal downstairs, and apparently in the building of the Kitchen, the theater downstairs with their seating is the staging area with all of the sounds and the speakers is directly below the gallery. So while I was there looking at the space, I heard this really loud sound bleed. And I was just like, wow, you have a crazy sound bleed problem. He's like, yeah, that's why when you said you wanted to show sound artwork here, I was a little hesitant because we always have to deal with this. And I was just like, well, okay, hold on, let's stop. Why don't we do this instead? And I decided to make this multi-channel sound installation called Sound Bleed at the Kitchen. And what I did was, for a week and a half, I spent time upstairs in the second floor gallery during performances and rehearsals, and recorded their sound bleed from different areas of the gallery space. And then I pieced together a sound piece and made a installation with light and white scrim. And I feel like this kind of approach to making site-specific sound work really starts to embody the actual energy of the space instead of me going into a space and being like, I'm going to put my painting there and there. I want to be able to come into a space and be like, okay, what is the issue here? How can we make this into something interesting? And so that's, my first lesson was working on this piece. I feel like I've been learning it, but this was the largest piece I made by far, utilizing this train of thought. And so I was in the back of the hallways of the gallery, the second floor gallery space, recording the sound bleed. This is just the placement of the speakers. So speaker 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is white scrim. We had halogen lights all around, and then this is where I mixed down the sound piece, and then wherever the speaker was making sound, it would trigger the light to react in certain light dimensions in order to show that the sound is coming from here, the sound is coming from there. To me, that's really important, that you see where it's going, where it's playing around you, so you can have some kind of a idea of where you are within it. So we had the white scrim put up all around. These are the gallery walls with the white scrim. I have so much white scrim at home right now. If you guys want some, let me know. And this is when the white scrim was finally up, they hooked it up to the fluorescent light fixture here. And then that was my mixing station there. And that was me mixing the piece with all of the lights on, because I needed to see how to connect each speaker to each light. So this is just a quick. So I'm just mixing the sound bleed, but it sounds like something's happening downstairs, which is perfect. That was the point. And then for the presentation itself, if you heard some sound coming from, then that was where the light showed itself. There's also this one that's a little bit better. And so I really am starting to develop this new understanding of how I'm creating site-specific work with chance, derived originally from my improvisations of the turntable, and going into this new direction of where am I now, how can I enhance this area and make it into something different. And so with that, I've been working with different sound sculptures. This one is just a fan on an oscillator blowing into a microphone. It actually turned out to be really meditating and really beautiful. I was surprised. But the reason why I was trying to work with wind and work with these fans was because I was approached by Ballroom Marfa, Mexican Summer, and the Judd Foundation to create a sound performance at Donald Judd's private home in Marfa called The Block. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was the first and only artist to be invited there. I didn't know until I got there last week, and it was really daunting. But when we were originally discussing the idea of me performing there, they're like, well, we want you to play outside in his backyard, but it's really windy there, and so we might have to create a structure around you to kind of block the wind so that you're protected from the wind. I was like, wait a second, hold on, let's take a second back. And decided to make a new sound installation called Wind Instruments at the Block, which are sound sculptures that you place in the block and it reacts to wind in different ways. So this is the view of the block itself. The way that Donald Judd built it is so brilliant. He built it so that the wall, the foundation of the wall goes with the land, not symmetrical with the way that the estate is made with these two artillery buildings that he renovated. It's such, when you spend like 3 days there, you're like, whoa, this piece is amazing. Like, the wall is an installation in itself, and it's gorgeous. So these were the first inspirations of that idea. But then they were telling me that I can't put holes in the ground, and that really changed the sculptures quite a bit. I was looking at these, in the UK, there's a lot of these singing sculptures, and because it gets really windy in the hills and things. And so I was also looking at how these other singing sculptures could inspire me in some way. This is me with Caitlin, who is the head curator of the Judd Foundation, as we're figuring it out. And this is just, I can't post these, I can show them to you because it's private, but this is inside his studio spaces in those buildings next to the block that are sandwiched, that the block is sandwiched between. Did you know that Donald Judd loved bagpipes? I didn't either. We saw his record collection. I saw his turntable. So exciting. And he has a huge collection of bagpipes, like bagpipe records. And I was just like, can I just have one so I can ruin it? It was so awesome. But of course you can't. It's all a museum now, his home and his kitchen and everything with his cassettes. And it has like this many records of just bagpipe music. I'm like, wow, his kids must have been thrilled with having to deal with that. So then these are just some early pictures. I still have to go through everything. This just happened last week. But it worked. I'm so glad. It really did get windy on the day of the performance. It started at 3. My performance was at 5. The sculptures were there throughout the day. And at first, the wind wasn't really blowing, and I was getting really nervous. And then with time, the wind started to go really crazy. And so I created this sculpture 1 here, which is sheet metal on a frame, because I couldn't stick it in the ground. Originally, it was going to be like a sheet metal flag, where I was going to stick it in the ground and it was just going to wave all day. But then they said no holes, so I had to create a base that my mother's husband helped me design. And so it's a larger steel sheet metal piece here, and then 2 smaller brass ones here, and they all had different tones and timbres to them when they were hit by the wind. And then there's kids playing with that one. This is my turntable setup for the performance portion of the, I'm trying to find, where are you? There. And this is the string instrument, which is metal string, so it's steel, brass, steel, into these holes. They were bent so that they could just move along the wind, and then there was a steel pipe here that was hollow, so they could hit it as the wind hit it, and it made all of these different, as the kids said, it sounds like bells. I'm like, yes, it works. I'm so glad. And then this piece here, this long tube, it's like a blue plastic roofing material wrapped in this sheet metal that's gated like so. And I had the kids, because I was giving a few workshops that day, it was like a snare drum. So they would pick up the gravel from the ground and they would drop it, and it would make a rainstorm sound. And they really responded to that. And then after the performance, they were allowed to, or after the workshop, they were allowed to go and play with everything, and the kids really responded to it. And then I performed at the end of the installation the wind really started to perform with me. As the wind hit these, then I was at my turntable station and I performed. And so I feel like this is one of those things where, as you start to develop and as you start to see where your work is going, you're taking what used to be a rejection, what used to, like, you know, when you write a grant, you have so much hope in it, and then it gets rejected, and you're like, oh my God, so much pain. And then once you start writing grants, like, I write like 4 a month, because now it's just a practice that I do. I'm starting to really see the shift from not necessarily being rejected anymore to starting to see the value of what other people are rejecting and trying to take it in and make it into something different. And so now I guess I can do a Q&A and then I can perform, or does that sound good? Thank you so much for your time. Thanks.